Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Tuesday, May 7th, 2024. I'm John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary Magazine. With me, as always, executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Senior editor Seth Mandel. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John.
And media commentary columnist and American Enterprise Institute senior fellow Kristi Noem. Hi, Christine.
Hi, John.
See if we can sort through the strands of what happened yesterday in Gaza with Israel and the negotiations such as they are with Hamas, and then the actual things that are happening, because it got very, very confusing. And Seth, maybe we can try to lay it out. So the flurry of announcements on Monday morning had to do with the fact that Hamas was reported to have accepted a ceasefire deal with Israel in 3 stages. In the first stage, Hamas, there would be a 42-day pause, right? That's 6 weeks. Israel would get back 33 hostages in exchange for free movement of Gaza Palestinians from the south to the north, opening of crossings for humanitarian aid and the like. And then then there would be a second ceasefire period, again, 6 weeks, for confidence building measures or something like that. And then in the third 6-week period, the rest of the hostages would be released. And of course, all along in this time, Palestinian prisoners, numbering either in the hundreds or the thousands, would be released. Except it turned out this was not a ceasefire proposal. No one accepted it. Hamas put it out and said that this was the deal that they had agreed to, only they hadn't negotiated the deal with Israel or Egypt or Qatar or anybody. They had just said this was their deal, and then they amended the deal as the day went on so that the hostages, they would release 33 hostages, but they wouldn't all be alive. You see, they couldn't guarantee that they would all be live hostages. And Israel said, okay, we're going. Okay, thanks very much. This is nonsense. We're done. We're going in. The war cabinet agreed to start the Rafah operation. Israeli troops said the Shema, and planes started flying and tanks started moving in. And then I think, as I understand it, by the end of the day, or even in the middle of the night, the Israelis agreed to go to Egypt to continue negotiations, even as they continued the operations in Rafah. Somebody telling a reporter that Israel got played yesterday, although I don't know how it got played exactly. Seth, can you see if you can make sense out of all of this?
Yeah, the officials.
By the way, did I get it right? Does that sound like the right? Because it was so confusing. Okay.
Yeah, that's basically what it is. And I'll read you a New York Times headline today. Some officials described the pact that Hamas had embraced as the U.S.-Israel proposal with minor wording changes. And John, as you alluded to, some of those minor wording changes were like changing alive to dead. Minor wording changes. They might be alive. They might be alive. But the point is that they are hostages. So these are just minor wording changes. So that tells you the reaction, how the media took the bait exactly as Hamas intended. Now, the Israeli complaint is that they can see from the document that Bill Burns had access to.
Bill Burns is the director of the CIA who is negotiating in Egypt, who is the lead negotiator in Egypt.
Right. And they say it's very clear to them that Bill Burns had access to the new version that Hamas said it accepted before Israel had even seen it. So initially, the complaint was that Hamas had tried to surprise everybody, but now it is that Hamas and everybody else tried to surprise the Israelis, and that it was some sort of last-ditch play to just let the clock keep rolling and push off a push off a Rafah offensive. But the idea is that Bill Burns, they knew what Hamas was going to be asking for and did not quash it. So they see that as some type of, it has the American imprimatur on it in a way. And what this reminds me of very much is a decade ago when Barack Obama was running his peace negotiations, he had John Kerry leading the peace negotiations. And John Kerry did this thing where he built what was essentially a Ponzi scheme. He was telling the Israelis that, and the end stage of this, the last prisoner exchange or whatever, they would not release certain people who had had committed certain crimes, and they would not be allowed in certain areas. And he was telling the Palestinian side, you'll get all your prisoners and they'll come wherever you want to go. And if they made it through several rounds of talks before they hit this prisoner swap problem. And John Kerry's whole his hope was,
by the way, you're talking here. Hold on, Seth, just so people understand, you're talking about the 2014 Gaza incursion, not the JCPOA, the Iran deal, because
right.
Yeah, so when there was
the Israeli-Palestinian negotiations were where he had and so what he had done was basically had hoped that by the time people figured out that he had double promised, it would be so late in the process that they would say, all right, let's fix the deal instead of just walking away at this late stage. And the Israelis right now, they see a replay of that in Bill Burns. They're concerned that Bill Burns was hoping that in doing this at the last minute and having Hamas agree to something the Israelis hadn't seen and blindside them, that the Israelis would say, well, we're there, we're negotiating, it's too late to dump the whole thing, we're so close, fine, let's work with this document and do it. And just as in 2014 with Kerry's Israeli-Palestinian talks, the Israelis didn't work because the promises to both sides had been way too far apart. So that's the complaint, that now that the Americans have bungled this, not just that they have not stopped Hamas from trying to pull trickery, but that they have, kind of really messed up here. And if that's the case, then the level of trust drops, and the Israelis are thinking, we're going to move forward, and if somebody gives us a plan that we like, we'll sign it. But life moves on. Obladi oblada, life goes on. The world turns, and this is the only thing that they can do now to have leverage, is to start the clock on Rafah. And every day that goes by, the Israelis are in a better negotiating position because they're in Rafah. That's the only way they can push back against what they see now, what they think they see as a 3-on-1 disadvantage.
This is another example of, it was either Abe or Matt who said a week or so ago, sometimes it feels like the U.S. isn't a neutral arbiter in these negotiations, nor is it negotiating with an eye towards what's best for its ally, which is Israel. Instead, it seems to be kind of a sort of sideline assistant coach for Hamas, because a lot of what you see in terms of the rhetoric is very much like, well, let's make sure, and we talk about the civilians in Gaza, but much of the strategic negotiation here is about what Hamas wants, what Hamas should get, because it's really not about protecting civilians. One of the things that I thought was notable in the statement that Kirby made, by the way, who we have heaped, I think, justifiably praise many times for some of the strength of his statements on behalf of the administration. He was a little weaselly yesterday. He's like, I'm not going to talk about the parameters of the proposal. This was worked out before Hamas's response. I'm not going to talk about the response. He didn't want to talk about it. That to me was quite telling. He didn't want to say out loud what everybody was already starting to notice behind the scenes, which is that this was a situation where we once again hung our ally out to dry in some sense, whether that's rhetorically or what we're doing on the ground. And I think the timing of this is also crucial. Today, President Biden is giving the keynote address at a Holocaust remembrance ceremony that's going on Capitol Hill. Now, the pre-statement that was released by the White House says he's going to condemn anti-Semitism. He's going to bring up October 7th. We'll see. But the fact that within 24 hours, we see him kind of once again doing the runaround with Israel, and then now we're going to hear him condemn anti-Semitism on October 7th. I'm not sure that this administration has any sort of consistency on its proposals going forward.
What's interesting about the point about how they seem to be sort of coaching Hamas here is that so much of the American negotiating energy seems to me to be aimed not even at sort of getting to what Hamas may want, but building up and trying to reinforce the idea that Hamas is negotiable, is exactly. A negotiating part. It's sort of building up the narrative around it is more important than anything. So they keep coming back to, we're encouraged, we have this, we've gotten to this step, and
meanwhile, Hamas is like, we just want to kill all the Jews.
It is all about pretending that they are something that they're not.
Yeah.
I looked up a column by my sister Ruthie Bloom, who, by the way, is about to inaugurate a podcast at the Jewish News Syndicate, and so everybody should look out for that. But in 2021, she wrote a column about Bill Burns traveling to Israel to talk to Mahmoud Abbas and the Israeli government about, the two-state solution or whatever. And she points this out in an op-ed in the Washington Post in May 2019. Burns exhibited a killer combination of ignorance about the Middle East and lack of vision about the plan that would lead to the signing of the Abraham Accords a mere year and a quarter later. Quote, this is Burns's op-ed from 2019. In keeping with his disdain for conventional wisdom and his bent for disruption, Trump might bury what is still the only viable plan of action for Israelis and Palestinians without offering anything resembling a workable substitute. He went on to say that, though, quote, neither Trump nor his son-in-law and chief negotiator Jared Kushner invented the steady decay of the two-state solution. They appear to be animated by a set of terminally flawed assumptions and illusions. The first of these, he claimed, quote, is that they can maneuver over and around Palestinians in negotiating a peace deal. The administration has effectively abandoned dialogue with the Palestinian leadership, embracing instead the agenda of the Israeli right. This can be seen in moving the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, closing the East Jerusalem consulate, sharply reducing life-saving assistance programs, condoning settlement expansions, recognizing Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights, and hinting that the administration is preparing to do the same in the West Bank. So Bill Burns, on the single signature most important diplomatic effort of the 2010s in the Middle East, scoffed and sneered and said it wasn't going to work, and said Trump's disdain for the status quo was just going to get him into trouble, and there's no way not to keep the Israeli-Palestinian relationship, by which he means, by the way, the relationship between Israel and the Palestinian Authority on the West Bank. He is not talking about how they need to negotiate with Hamas. So this is a guy who is wrong-headed from the get-go. He gets things wrong. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He was a press flack who got raised to the level of a higher policy official and now is running the CIA. And this is the guy who was wandering around, again, behind our allies' back, trying to create a fact on the ground that to retard Israel's progress in confronting and winning the war that Israel started. And I think one of the things that happened yesterday is the Israelis could take no more. And the operation started. Now they're going to be in Cairo to continue talks. And there is a possibility that they decided to roll the tanks in and start things actually in Israel's terms to give Hamas one more shot at getting the hostages out, because they really, really don't want to face Israel down in Rafah. And when Israel says, oh no, we're here, we're coming for your jugular. Is it going to be bloody? Yes. Is it going to be terrible? Yes. But we've already evacuated tens of thousands of Palestinians. That's what the Americans said we needed to do, is have an evacuation plan. We got one. 100,000 people are going to be evacuated in the next, in the next 96 or 48 hours or something like that. So we're doing what we're supposed to do in humanitarian terms. And so maybe we, not with a bluff, but with action, can get Hamas to step down, say they're going to send back the hostages, and get an actual ceasefire in which we are not going to say there will be no more war. We're not going to say it. We're just going to say we're rolling into Rafah and we're going to destroy you now. Or you could take your chances, let the hostages out, see where things go. We're probably going to destroy you later. We're certainly not going to say we're not going to destroy you later. And so there are two tracks now in the Israeli effort here. One is the actual mission in Rafah, and the other is whether or not they can impress upon Hamas that it's time, as the dangling the fake mouse in front of the cat is over. Like, they're going to grab the fake mouse and then they're going to go after the real mouse, and maybe you'll see reason for 5 seconds, and you monsters will let out the people whom you are torturing, holding hostage.
And by the way, I just want to add that the New York Times seems to have confirmed the Israeli side of things. It says
meaning that Burns did this behind their back.
Yeah, here's what it says: that Burns was the official said that the changes were made by Arab mediators in consultation with William J. Burns, and that the officials they're talking about are not Israeli officials, because although they don't say, it then goes on to say the two officials said the response from Hamas was a serious one, and that it was now up to Israel to decide whether to enter an agreement. So two officials who are clearly working on the side of the Americans, Qataris, however you want to say it. One of them, the New York Times says, is based in the Middle East. It sounds to me like they are Americans, the sources, but whatever it is, the Times makes clear that this is coming from the pro-Bill Burns side. It is confirming that they worked on the details with him, and then it is repeating the propaganda line that the ball is now in Israel's court. So it's seeking, instead of to deny, to just flood the zone and reshape the way people are hearing the story when they wake up first thing in the morning, since it happened late last night. And that one of the things they're talking about is that I think you alluded to, which is that Burns apparently knows that the phrase sustainable calm in the second or third round of the ceasefire deal, Hamas has told mediators it interprets that as an end to the war. And so Israel is objecting to the use of that phrase because Hamas has said, to us, this means the end of the war. And Burns was hoping that they could say, well, it's ambiguous and the Israelis never promised to end the war and stuff like that. So it really does actually seem to be a confirmation of the replay that, we were just talking about with Kerry about, just sort of yeah-yang everybody until you get so far in and you believe that the momentum is too strong for it to completely fall apart.
You know where momentum is? Momentum is now with the Rafah invasion. Let's just explain, just so people understand. So Israel's been waiting for 3 months to go into Rafah. Last week, it returned a call back for hundreds of thousands of reservists to go back in. The reservists are not going to be the frontline troops in Rafah, but what that means is, okay, we are now disrupting ordinary Israeli life again on a mass scale. Everybody got to go home. Now they're coming back. They're coming back in. They're going to be, support staff and whatever. And so suddenly workplaces have been emptied of their managers between the ages of 25 and 40. Parents are away from their children. People are scrambling to get childcare and get through ordinary life with, spouses away. And just saying, no, you know what? Nah. you know what? We're pulling. It's over. We're going back again. Then we'll get you back. The entropy is not the right word. I mean, the momentum is Israel keeps going, and something major is going to have to happen for Israel to pull back, because it's no walk in the park to start a major military offensive and then freeze it, call a halt to it, and send everybody home, even though they're so close physically, geographically. So this is a delusion on the part of the negotiators and the processors. They are deluded if they think that Israel can just now slam on the brakes and send everybody home without a major concession from Hamas, like a major, not 33 hostages, 50 hostages, 60 hostages. Like, they've changed the facts on the ground now because they're in, and they have now seized the Rafah crossing. They're trapped. The Hamasniks are trapped. They are making military moves to isolate Rafah, to empty it out of civilians to the extent that they can, and then to go at Hamas's jugular finally and all at once. And so the only way that is going to stop is that Bibi Netanyahu and the war cabinet can say, we are getting what we need right now. And nothing in this deal is getting what they need right now. They're not even promised live hostages. So,
well, and they have delayed and delayed and delayed this military response because of the negotiations. I mean, that's something we shouldn't forget. I mean, this was something they could have done months earlier and did not, under pressure from allies and the demands for negotiations. And they have, I just feel like they've jumped through a lot of hoops here for the international community and to sort of try everything possible. But now they can't, because they do have to destroy Hamas. That was always the goal. Always the goal, because they have learned the lesson that you cannot leave even a tiny bit of them with any sort of power or weapons or the ability to attack Israel again. And that's the part that I think that's where the U.S. looks ridiculous when the negotiation seems to be, again, to Abe's earlier point, as if Hamas is something that it'll be fine. We'll just disarm them and they'll just hang around and do like NGO-ish things once this is all over. No,
I don't think anybody
even
even believes they're going to be disarmed. The simple fact of the calculus of the administration now is the heat's too high. The war needs to stop.
Right.
Now, I don't even know what that means, since all we ever hear is this, well, what's Israel's plan for the day after, right? What if Israel destroys Hamas? What's its plan for the day? Well, what's the plan for the war that freezes with Hamas still kind of in place, though buried in the tunnels? Right. Who's going to run Gaza then? Are they going to come out and then administer things without fear of Israel, assassinating every Hamas leader that it can find with drones and whatever? They can't come out of the tunnel. So who's going to run Gaza?
They can't even control aid. Look, I'm sorry, but these organizations and the international community cannot even prevent Gaza from stealing the aid that's been flowing in. I mean, that basic function of the NGOs, of all the the blatherers in the Biden administration, they can't even get the aid to the people who need it.
Abe.
Yeah, I mean, I think what the administration was hoping for was an indefinitely frozen conflict that they can do nice things around. And when, as John says, Biden's likes to do the next nice thing available. So if you just stop all that fighting stuff, that's not nice. Freeze the conflict, and then we'll bring in aid. We'll look at the aid. We'll tell you about the aid. And then this can drag on.
We'll build a pier.
We'll build a pier. Without any resolution. You're right, John. There's never any pressure on the administration to talk about what on earth it would mean to leave Hamas battalions in Gaza, in the state that it's in, and Israel in retaliation mode. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Well, let's talk a little more about the ridiculousness of the administration and the pickle that it has put itself in. And I'm going to be my broken record, which is Biden is now on the verge of basically getting the worst of every possible world that is the consequence of American actions after October 7th, which is to say that he and his administration for good, and the United States for good reasons, because of the aid that is being provided, are on the hook as Israel's leading and maybe in some sense even only ally in the argument that it should remove Hamas as a political and a moral and a military and a terrorist actor. Right? So that's the United States cannot get away from that role that it appears to have. But it wants people to think that that's not its role, that it's in some other role. I don't really understand what role it thinks that they want people to have. So, as is classically the case, they have run this set of plays and they have followed this path down the road, and now they are acting like Israel's critic, or Israel's, I wouldn't say betrayer, but sort of like they're going behind Israel's back to cut a separate deal with Hamas when we're not even a player in this conflict. The only player in this conflict is Biden as a domestic policy matter, how he is viewed in relation to this conflict by American voters. And I, again, don't understand why being weak and oscillating and changing sides and changing tunes and wagging his finger at Israel and not saying all that much about Hamas over the last couple of months and all of that, how that helps him and doesn't hurt him. Because it's not convincing everybody who was LARPing in the protests and whoever it is that they're representing. And it is alienating by degrees Americans who, and I think, Abe, we need to turn to this now, who are looking, if they watch the news or they do whatever, and they're looking and they are seeing how the protests have now shifted from Israel is being really mean to Palestinians, Israel's committing a genocide in Gaza, to death to America on American soil, like people chanting death to America on American soil in Arabic, like this is Tehran in 1980.
Desecrating last night with the protests were unleashed on the Met Gala in New York City, but they were blocked by NYPD before they could fully get there. So they went to a World War I memorial, desecrated it. There one person at one of these protests recently, I don't remember which campus this was, turned up preaching praise for North Korea. Have you seen this? It is now just an overt convention of tyranny and terrorism supporters. And that is its true face. And if Biden wants to keep trying to play footsie with that crowd, that's up to him. I can't imagine that there's not at this point someone inside the administration saying we're getting this a little wrong here.
Well, this is, I think,
Thursday,
well, I was just going to say, this is where the average American who might not really feel they need to follow what's going on in the Middle East or even the campus protests about it, they're starting to pay attention to exactly that. The anti-American rhetoric, the defacing of buildings and monuments, the, George Washington statue draped in, Palestinian terrorist garb. That really does resonate in the same way that I think in the summer of George Floyd protests, there was a first a patience about, okay, people are kind of blowing off steam, they're angry, they have a cause. And then that quickly became, let's topple every statue of the founders that we can find in our city or town. That shift, that starts to really bother the normies, as they're called. And the normies are the ones who got Biden elected because they were sick of the chaos. They were sick of the Trump, all over the map stuff. And Biden promised them stability. and he has delivered the opposite. That's where as a political matter, he really has to respond to that anti-Americanism, that sense of chaos. And he's incapable of doing it. He gives like one tentpole speech every 3 weeks and is like, there we go, my campaign's humming along. I mean, I don't think he's capable of doing that at this point.
You know, you make a very important point, because in 2020, in the summer of 2020, when we started doing this podcast 5 days a week, one of our topics was, all right, who's going to start blaming, who's going to take the political blame for the disorder and the destruction and the mostly peaceful protests that were lighting things on fire and all of that. And I think the general line was, well, this should marginally help Trump because he's the only person who is talking about how bad this is and we should send in the National Guard or whatever. Okay. But see, he didn't do anything. He didn't actually, he just blathered like he did about, you know, COVID and stuff, and he didn't do anything. And the disorder eventually burned out. But there was no sense that he confronted anything except when he took that dumbass walk into Lafayette,
which is basically his backyard.
Into the park, and holding the Bible upside down and all of that. And so the chaos, he could not get away with being blamed for the chaos that was ideologically totally antagonistic to everything he stood for, because he's the president and the chaos was taking place on his watch, right? So if I'm right about this and that was a net contributor to Trump's defeat, even though he said the things that normies would have wanted to hear a president say, Biden is walking himself into a buzzsaw, because not only, okay, he said last week that, you know, this is not right and you shouldn't let students not go to class. We're moving beyond that, and we're going to move
Where's his
beyond
Department
that.
of Justice prosecuting people doing that, as they love to do when it's ideologically someone on the other side, where he could take action?
Yeah. So I think, again, he is moving into a position in which he is getting the worst of everything, which is that the people who might be inclined to say the United States stood up for right in Israel against this terrorist group and this monstrous thing he did. And I got to say, I've had some problems with him, but, you know, there he is being, you know, a stalwart supporter of an ally. And this is not just Zionists or the 2% of Americans, you know, who are Jewish or even evangelical Christians. This is like a fact pattern that, remember, we got hostages we got an oil embargo put up against us in 1973 by OPEC. We had hostages taken with a second oil embargo in 79. We had hostages taken by Iran in 1980. We had the first World Trade Center bombing in 93. We had the Khobar Towers bombing in 1996. We had 9/11 in 2001. Americans who are not 22 years old have a long memory, and their memory of American involvement with radical Arabs is not a positive memory. And this whole summer this all started 3 weeks ago. This whole summer is going to be a callback for anybody who is over the age of 35 to bad times. And the people who are doing this stuff look like people who are in the same tradition as the people who caused America grief and sorrow and anger and hatred. And Biden is doing nothing to align himself against them and with the Americans who have a memory of the kinds of direct assaults on the United States promulgated by Arab radicals.
There's a video this morning of events at GW where the protesters are trying to raise the Palestinian flag and at a flagpole, like an actual flag, and they're pulling the pulley, string and trying to raise the flag, and the cops come, and at one point there's a tug of war where there's a few cops they're holding the pulley string, and the protesters come in and grab and try to pull it out of their hands or whatever. It's not even clear what they're trying to do. And at one point, a police officer just says, okay. And he walks up with a knife and he cuts the line. And the police system goes, and that's it. So, there's a enough already attitude. Like you can see the look on the cops' faces. You could see like we're just gonna cut the poll. Then we're just like I'm not playing games anymore, and it reminds me a bit of the way that you in when you mentioned the George Floyd protests and and the tagging and vandalism of statues, the one that always stood out to me was the tagging of the Stevie Ray Vaughan statue in Austin, Texas, because in this was in 2020 in George Floyd, but in 2018, twice in like a week after the Philadelphia Eagles won the Super Bowl, people spray painted the Stevie Ray Vaughan. He's the great guitarist from Texas. People spray painted the Stevie Ray Vaughan statue in Austin in an Eagles jersey or something like that. And then that person was arrested. These were big news stories because you don't touch Stevie Ray Vaughan. You don't mess with Stevie Ray. And then it happened again. And the next person, but like they were like, we have reports of arrests in the case of the Stevie Ray Vaughan statue spray painting. It was like a big thing. And then 2 years later, the George Floyd protest, somebody spray painted FTP, which is F the police, on Stevie Ray Vaughan. And this was like and people were just outraged. And this is sort of what the protests are reminding me of now. It's like there's something that there's a level of anti-American, not just Americanism, but like anti-Americana. Like this is, this is special to us. This is who we are. This is our culture. Like whatever.
I want to talk about the cops.
You guys are just trying to ruin everything, right? And so they're seeing now evidence that it's not just about flags or this war or this or that. Now they're just running around. That was like the realization that these people running around town are just trying to destroy everything that you like because it will upset you, and that tends to change.
Right. But if we pull back from that, I just have a little factoid from the Department of Justice, okay? So who's going to confront these people during the long, hot summer when it happens everywhere? Cops, right?
Yes.
According to the Department of Justice, nearly 25% of today's law enforcement community in the United States has a military background. Let's discuss what that means for a minute, okay? The United States has been at war, or was at war, however you want to slice it, from 2001 until the pullout from Afghanistan in 2021, 20 years. Almost every single one of those 25% of Americans working in law enforcement was in Iraq or Afghanistan. You think when they look at these 22-year-old kids in keffiyehs that they are not filled with rage? You think that we're not having a replay of the kinds of things that happened in the late 1960s? There was a famous incident here in New York in 1970 called the Hard Hat Riot, when Vietnam War protesters were faced down by working class Americans, either who themselves had served, had just come back from serving, or had kids in Vietnam, and they went in and they busted some heads because they'd had enough of this anti-American, vicious supporting of communist totalitarian regimes and people who were actively supporting the people who were killing their children or their family members, or would have been happy to see them die had they been in uniform. And again, every single one of those people is going to vote against Biden. And their family members are going to vote against Biden if he doesn't get himself into a better frame in relation to this thing. And there is absolutely no indication that that's the case. Abroad, we are now negotiating against Israel's interests, which is weird. Since, again, it's not like Israel doesn't know what's good for it. It should really stop in Rafah. They don't think Israel should stop in Rafah because it's good for Israel. They're worried about Rafah for their own reasons. So it's one thing if you're being paternalistic and saying, well, we have to do this because, their emotions are just so wrapped up in this thing. And, we need to help them because they just can't help themselves. They now have an alternate agenda from the agenda that in policy terms, we are still abiding by. I should mention, and then I'm going to stop this, that there was a big story over the weekend about how America was withholding some portion of military aid to Israel, quietly in order to show that blah, 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 blah. And of course, it was leaked to Barak Ravid, the stenographer, and it's not true. Like, according to the Defense Department, in no way, shape, or form has any aid to Israel been held up in the last week. So people are now telling lies about how the United States is implementing policy decisions against Israel to let that out in the world, for the world to know that we're separating ourselves from them. And it's not even true.
But so this is where I think the problem isn't just Biden specific, it's Democratic Party specific. And the problem is, if you look, there are all these little signals. I mean, we know the squad is a bunch of raging anti-Semites who've made that increasingly clear since October 7th. But then you have people like Bernie Sanders, who has recently upended an attempt to have a bipartisan hearing in the Senate about anti-Semitism and said, I'm not going to schedule that hearing unless we also make it broader. We got to talk about Islamophobia. So there's a widening contingent in the Democratic Party leadership and in the Democratic Party on the Hill to again, all sides this. On the other hand, you see in that image that was captured in Columbia in the Hamilton Hall takeover of a Hispanic janitor trying to stop the son of a multimillionaire who's in his 40s from smashing up the building. And that's the Democratic Party is represented by the billionaire's kid now, or millionaire's kid, not the janitor. The janitor's not the Democratic Party anymore. It used to be. But that shift of the sort of white, highly educated, elite Democratic Party, they love the protests because even if they don't want their kids' future professional prospects damaged by their own LARPing around, they look at that and they're like, look at free speech, look at the kids these days, look how energized they are with the cause. The people actually cleaning up the trash from those protests used to be the base of the work of the Democratic Party, and it's not. It's moving away. He should be worried about that because it's not just about Israel. It's also about his future party's base, and he's got a convention coming up where I think we're going to see the white, elite, highly educated, wealthy, which is the Democratic Party now, really show its true face.
Okay, so
not only, but
go ahead.
I just want to say, but look what he's doing, Biden. So look how cozy he seems to be to the billionaires' kids.
Yes.
With he's forgiving student loan debt.
Yes. And reclassifying weed. It's like,
right, yeah, and reclassifying
every college
weed,
kid's
right?
dream.
Yeah, and meanwhile you got the janitors literally trying to save institutions and buildings. Yeah.
All right.
And
So
the donors,
Francesca
the billionaires
Block
are giving money to the protesters. Also, like the billionaires,
Yes,
literally.
Yeah, we have to go. That's a whole multi-hour topic we should discuss later in the week.
Tides Foundation. We should have a special episode.
Yes, but I want to talk about Mario Torres. That's the janitor who was in Hamilton Hall. Okay, because Francesca Block of the Free Press got an interview with Mario Torres. Okay, and here's what Mario Torres said. This 45-year-old janitor makes $19 an hour, or the job that starts at $19 an hour. Okay? We don't expect to go to work and get swarmed by an angry mob with rope and duct tape and masks and gloves. They came from both sides of the staircases. They came through the elevators and they were just rushing. It was like they had a plan. He said protesters with zip ties, duct tape, and masks just multiplied and multiplied. At one point, he remembers looking up, and I noticed the cameras are covered. This was definitely planned. When it comes to the public safety, the worker safety, people don't feel comfortable walking through a mob to punch in to get into campus. That's crazy. He's added that he's worried Columbia might take disciplinary action against him for speaking out. Quote, is Columbia going to retaliate and find a reason to fire me? Is someone going to come after me? So I'm taking a big risk doing this interview, but I think that they failed. They failed us, and I think that's the bigger story. They failed us. They should have done more to protect us, and they didn't. And that's America under Biden and this mob. Okay? And Mario Torres, if the Trump campaign is smart, Mario Torres will start appearing on commercials. I don't know whether he is whether he's a native Spanish speaker or not. Trump will make a commercial with him speaking in Spanish on Univision and Telemundo and say, these lunatic leftist white boy Americans like this guy whose name is something Carlson, the rich boy who led the 40-year-old anarchist, whose name he claims to be Carlson, and it's not Carlson. It's something Jewish, I'm sorry to say, living in a $3 million townhouse in Park Slope with his wife and 3 children, and his parents ran a successful ad agency, and his father wrote a play that he produced on off-Broadway on the trial of George W. Bush. So the apple doth not fall far from the tree. And this is the war. The war is going to be the war between people who don't like America being run down and don't like having rich boy people who aren't even students, like, zipped with zip ties in their hands with a plan, putting tape on cameras so no one can see what they're doing. This is real. Like, this is a real, and that's not cosplay. This is an election. Biden got 81 million votes last time. Anybody think he's going to get 81 million votes this time? Now, enthusiasm is way down. The election numbers will probably be way down. But I mean, the amount of material that is being generated for Trump to say, miss me. Now, we know everybody who's going to vote for Biden, who is Biden's base, doesn't miss Trump. They hate Trump. They hate him like poison. They hate everything about him. And they have reason. I mean, he did lead an insurrection. He should have been impeached and removed and convicted for January 6th and all of that. But chaos versus chaos, 2020 versus 2024. Trump did not create COVID. And Biden's inaction is creating the long, hot summer we're about to go through, I think.
My one question is this. What is the Biden campaign looking at that's suggesting to them that there should be no change in this, or that they're not seeing this trend? In other words, they've made a strategic decision. They're not going to confront the protesters. They're, whatever, all this stuff. But what are they seeing? Because everything that we're seeing suggests that what they're doing now, however you characterize it, is not working, right? The numbers are not right now where the Biden campaign would remotely want them to be. And the Biden campaign knows that. So what is the reason for the stasis? What is the reason for just sitting around and letting this thing roll on exactly how it was? That's what I don't understand. They're not seeing indications that this is paying returns. Well, they know that it's going badly.
Well, part of it's that both sides understand the election is going to be decided by an extremely small number of people, as it was, even smaller perhaps than the last election was. And they look at the polling data that says it's still the economy, crime, immigration. It's still those big issues. Although I think all of those, with the exception of the economy, the instability argument, which is the one that Trump should make. Like, I might have been crazy, but I didn't, turn the country into an unstable zone on every score. Open border, bad economy, crazy protesters on every campus, destroying everything. I mean, that's where I think the stability argument could help him. But I mean, this is still going to be decided in a handful of swing states. I mean, that's just the reality. So maybe they're looking at those swing state voters and going, they're not even following this nonsense. They don't watch the news. They care about other things.
How about they stink at this?
Yeah, always a possibility.
How about
Occam's razor?
They have misread the drama of the moment. They had people coming to the White House saying, "Oh boy, the Arabs are beer-born are mad at you." Then, you only won by 150,000 votes, and we got polling showing Trump is moving up in Michigan, and we better do something about that. And they're like, "Oh no, oh my God," like that. Like, maybe they don't know what they're doing. The Bush 92 didn't know what he was doing. He ran one of the worst campaigns ever and lost, and they don't know what they're doing. And
I just think they
rots from the head.
I just think that the administration has aligned itself too closely with the squad and squad adjacent types to undo it enough to the degree that would require them to do something. tactically.
That's certainly true.
right.
Yes.
Not because Biden is a squadnik, but tactically, he so wanted to keep them at a sort of, friendly arm's length, because they turn on him in a second, that he now is like he's trapped.
I think you're absolutely right. I think it's very hard for political organizations to shift gears or change directions because it makes them look weak and because they don't really understand the ramifications of what that would mean. And what do people say when you said, well, you just said this 2 weeks ago and now you're saying something different? It is against the sort of the antibodies inside inside a campaign to do something like that. And unless they have a full-blown plan, it's like Carter wrote his political epitaph in 1980 when he said, I've learned more about communism in the last week from Soviet behavior in Afghanistan than I had learned in my entire life. And it's like, really? I thought we elected you president because you understood things like this. Maybe we better look somewhere else. If it took you till
major buyer's remorse there. Major buyer's remorse.
But I mean, he said it. It's like politicians make terrible mistakes. Now we're going to talk about the biggest, most hilarious mistake, of the year. But I mean, like Walter Mondale said, Ronald Reagan says he's not going to raise your taxes and he's lying. I'm telling you I'm going to raise your taxes. What? First of all, Ronald Reagan didn't raise your taxes. And second of all, he did that at the Democratic Convention in 1984. He was like, I'm now going to speak the sentence that is going to make me lose 49 states. Here it is, everybody. I'm raising taxes.
Ta-da!
I mean, politicians do make terrible, terrible errors. And Seth is really enjoying the tour of disaster, the Spider-Man turn off the dark play in politics of all time right now on the part of Kristi Noem.
I can't look away, and I don't even know, I don't even know if enjoy is the right word. I mean, I watched last night. I watched the incredibly close Knicks game, and it just, it strains you. It pushes you to the limits. This playoff game that comes down to the final possession, and it was the most incredible game. I don't even know if I would characterize that as enjoying it, though. Even though the Knicks won, I feel like some things are just you can't look away. But that's what Kristi Noem is. She's being asked about things that she wrote in her book, and she's already said, well, we had a ghostwriter, which politicians have. But again, this is the thing that like the taxes thing. You don't just come right out and say, well, I didn't write my book, so what do you want from me? Because that doesn't end the questions, right? It doesn't. So what? You didn't write the book. Presumably, if your ghostwriter wrote that you personally met Kim Jong-un in North Korean territory over the line of the DMZ, presumably whoever wrote that because they were told that you met the North Korean dictator. And so she's doing these interviews, and yesterday she did one where she's sitting around. I don't remember which show it was, but she's sitting around the table with everybody, and they're just saying repeatedly, they're repeating the question to her. Did you tell your ghostwriter to write that? And she won't answer. And her answer is, it seems like her answer is like, well, we really shouldn't discuss all this stuff because it's top secret, and I shouldn't go into the meetings. We should take that part out. Because even if it were true, you shouldn't be allowed to know about, my meetings with the North Korean dictator and stuff like that. And they say, but that's not an answer. And she says, well, that's the answer I have for you. And it's all she's saying. She's
like
reading,
Karine Jean-Pierre.
Yeah,
I don't have anything on that.
She's reading like stage direction is what I'm saying. Like she's saying things that you're not like, that's the answer I brought with me today. It's like, well, we're live here and we're having a conversation. Four humans are having a discussion. And she's like, well, it's the answer that I have for you. Here it is. Like she could drop it off in an envelope and walk away. So there's like this thing happening where she's just like, look, We all know politicians don't write books. We all know that you come to these interviews with canned answers and prepared answers that you're not supposed to deviate from. And she's just basically just saying all these things out loud. I don't write my own books. I don't write my own statements. I don't write my own talking points. I'm just here to deliver words that other people have written. And that is supposed to absolve her in some sort of way, but it's just an incredible train wreck.
She's
But
like a
one thing we
politician bot,
know-
though. No, but like that's actually the future of politicians. Like, right? She's very Instagram ready. She's attractive. She was, there was all this buzz about her. She had these pictures of herself hunting and killing things. And we know she loves to kill puppies and goats and, any sort of, vague farm animal. Like send her to the deer population in Rock Creek here. She could do some damage. But when pressed, she literally is just a shell. She is an image. It's like the Daniel Borson book, The Image. It used to be like, oh, we have these photo ops. We all know they're fake, but we're all kind of in on the joke because we know they're a necessary part of this kind of political performance art. Well, that's all we have is the performance art. There's no politician behind the photo op.
And they tell you it's performance art. She's just up there saying,
right.
Well,
like,
this
I'm
is
not real.
On the live show. This is performance art. What do you think this?
Okay, so there now seem to be two different, I would say, physical models, but physical is not quite the right design models of the contemporary American female politician who was like rising fast and taking important jobs. And that maybe Sarah Palin was the inaugurator of. But Gretchen Whitmer has it, and Kristi Noem has it, and Kathy Hochul of New York has it, right? They're leather wearing badasses, right? They're pretty, they're attractive, but they're not going for the floral print dress or something. They are Lauren Boebert wants to be this too. Like they are attractive and tough, and they're wearing tough, mannish-y clothing because they're wearing leather and woo. And you know what?
But they try to be a little sexy, but not too much.
No, they want to be sexy.
This
is the sexy, right?
Yeah.
And then you have the other type. That's Katie Britt, or a couple of other types. Marjorie Taylor Greene. They wear floral stuff. They're this, and they're trying to be winsome in some fashion or other. And the weird thing about the tough broad, if I could just sort of put it that way, I don't know, even though that's obviously terribly sexist and all of that, is there's something blundering about them in a strange way, like they probably are kind of tough, and they probably are kind of like the kind of person who would shoot a dog in a gravel pit, and they don't know how to modulate it. And so Kristi Noem started this book tour with the story about shooting the dog in the gravel pit. What was that intended to demonstrate? That she's willing to make the hard decisions. She's willing to make the hard decisions, which include shooting a puppy that she could have brought to a shelter or had one of her aides drive to a shelter in, I can't remember which, Pierre. Or, is that her state? Is Pierre the capital of her state, or is Bismarck the capital of her state? I don't even remember.
By the way,
they got a rescue. They got a shelter. They got a rescue program. Every state has them.
Do we even know that story's true?
God, I mean, in a weird way, I hope it's not true, and I hope it's true, because if it's not true, then she is just
right. I mean, because the delicious thing about all this is, you don't have to put out a book. You don't have to tell story. Like this is so self-generated, even though she's not the writer. That's what's so much fun about this. It didn't happen to her. She did it to herself entirely. She foisted a massive collection of mistakes onto the voting public.
Yeah, and it wasn't like she said something in a room with donors that was supposed to be off the record.
Right. That's a basket of puppy deplorables. Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. That's when we usually get stuff like that. Or someone remembered something from when somebody was 15. or something like that. I mean, Romney did say we loved our dog so much that we took him on our vacations and put him on the roof in a carrier. Like, he did say that. Like, that was his story about how much he loved his dog.
And it's undoubtedly true.
And of course it's true.
Right. But he didn't shoot him. He did. I love him so much. It's like, when I was a kid growing up, I had this friend who had all these pets. And he had a room full of pets, and one of them was, he had gerbils over here, and then he had a cage of like a Gila monster or some sort of Komodo dragon or something, one of those lizards, and he had a snake, and he had a dog, and when the dog would come in, as we know, the gerbils, the mother gerbils, they eat their babies to protect them. So the dog couldn't be let into his room because the gerbils
would then
eat their babies. And he needed the babies to feed to the Komodo dragon in the corner and the other side. Right.
It's
so you had like
dark
a whole
circle of life.
The circle of life.
This is like Kristi Noem's like
in a suburban New Jersey, ranch house.
This is South Jersey. South Jersey is very different from the rest of New Jersey, I have to tell you. But this is like, Kristi Noem is like, I'm the gerbil mother who will eat my children if the threat comes in the room. If the Springer Spaniel comes in this room,
right.
If Fido comes near me, that's the kind of toughness they project. It's not even, it's like, I'm going to kill the thing is not.
Listen,
like, I don't believe this. Want me protecting you because I'll kill you if you're in danger. Like,
Thank God she did this. Thank God she did this, because she's a psychopath, and she has now made it impossible for her to rise any further in American politics. And we don't need a female version of the politician from the Dead Zone.
She should get an Animal Planet show.
Yeah. Like we don't need, like, when in the Dead Zone, when the psychic holds the Martin Sheen's hand, Christopher Walken, and sees a nuclear apocalypse. Like, that's kind of where, like, she nowhere near the button for Kristi Noem. I'm sorry. Like, it's bad enough that she can make decisions. Again, is it Pierre? Is it Bismarck? I don't know which Dakota she's in. I can't remember. I do love the fact that we are now in a Veep stakes in which, at least until a couple of weeks ago, two of the most serious candidates for vice president were the governor of North Dakota and the governor of South Dakota. Like, that is pretty.
There's still Bergamentum.
They still are. The other ones, Bergamentum is still. This is
real
great for Doug Burgum, but he's
paging
been doing
Matt
great.
Continetti.
But
listen to me. I got that merch. It's very important that Burgum become the vice presidential nominee, because I am the only person in New York with Burgum merch. And, I want to walk around on the Upper West Side in my Burgum hat and see how long it takes before I get attacked on the streets. Anyway,
now it'll catch on. But
yes.
By the way, just before Christine does it, I just want to remind everybody that there's a video, since we're talking about the Hunter versus the trad wife as the Republican women.
Oh, that's a good way
the video of Sarah Palin. Yeah, the Hunter versus the trad wife is how I sort of think it. There's the video of Sarah Palin on Thanksgiving giving a TV interview talking about what she's thankful for while turkeys are being slaughtered in the background, and you're watching it. And the guy slaughtering the turkeys turns every so often and looks to the cat. So people can look that up if you want the authentic, like the original, origin story of the Hunter version of that character. It is Sarah Palin giving an interview while turkeys are being slaughtered behind.
Beautiful. Okay, Christine, you're up with commentary recommendation.
Wow, I don't know how to top that for recommendations. But I have one. It's a live show on Netflix this week that is hosted and run by comedian John Mulaney. And it's called John Mulaney Presents Everybody's in LA. So it started on Friday, I believe. And every night it's 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific time, he does a live show. Some of, their little recorded segments. It's kind of like it's an old school variety show. And the reason I love it, I love John Mulaney anyway, but it's so great because if you are an East Coast city dweller, or in my case, that's what I've been for almost 30 years. But before that, I was a Florida native with slight California envy. it really kind of explains LA in a quirky and approachable way. LA is a really weird place. If you spend any time there, it's a strange city. Obviously an industry town, and he approaches it with the kind of whimsy and slight cynicism of a great comedian, which he is. And so he interviews people on the street. He has all of his friends in town who are there for a Netflix comedy special, sits them down on the couch, and they talk about weird things about LA. And at first I thought this was going to be a disaster, but it's great. It's somehow great. I like listening to comedians talk to each other, riff rather than kind of do their very honed stand-up. He has a monologue at the beginning of each episode that's obviously very good, but it's fun and it's weird, and it kind of captures something about LA that made it charming to me again, because I don't tend to be a big fan of LA. But I highly recommend it. So we're on Wednesday. I think it goes through Friday. It's aired live, but if you've missed the other episodes, they obviously have them up on Netflix. And it's only on Netflix. So that's my recommendation for today. Everybody's in LA with John Mulaney on Netflix.
I'm really enjoying it myself, and I will say that if you just get a chance, and you can only sample a little bit of it, just watch the first episode, which was on Friday.
Which is great. Yeah.
He does the overall monologue in which he pulls down a map of LA and sort of describes what LA is and what it's like and how it started and what the neighborhoods are like. And it is a masterclass in how to do an amazing 10-minute monologue. There's also a hilarious moment in that special later on where Will Ferrell,
yes,
plays a real life record producer, superstar record producer of the 1960s and 70s named Lou Adler, who was a real person, who says at some point in a thick New York accent something like, "You have the spine of a grape," which I really thought was a fantastic line. Anyway, everybody's in LA on Netflix. John Mulaney live at 10 p.m. Eastern, but you can watch the episodes whenever you want to. Great recommendation. We'll be back tomorrow for Abe, Christine, and Seth. I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.